Welcome to week 4, crew. You made it through the first 3 weeks and I am very proud of you. We're going to jump right into today's lesson. So go ahead and get out your sketchbook, your week 4 handout, your pencil, and your eraser, and we're going to cut right to the video. Speaking of cuts, there's a lot of cuts in this video. I fast forward through the places where I am just sketching or drawing. I don't expect you to keep up with me, so just go at your own pace and do the best you can, and don't be afraid to start over. All right, let's get started. All right, crew. Let's go ahead and get our sketchbooks out of the way for now. We don't need that. You don't need your pencil. You just need your ears and your eyes. And to listen to me go over this handout. It might be intimidating because there's a lot to explain when it comes to shading. It can be a little complicated, but I tried to simplify it for you so that it might be easier for you to understand. Shading is usually one of the last steps in the process. First we did the shapes, then we did the details, and now we're going to do the shading as well. I broke the shading down into 5 different values for you. If this is a little too much for you, you can lower it down to 3 of these to make a nice piece of art that looks fairly realistic. But if you want it to look the most realistic, go ahead and use at least these 5, and here they are. First we have the highlight, which is going to be the lightest value on your subject, and that is where the light hits the subject. Shading is based on the lighting and where the light is coming from, where the light is going. On our subjects here, the light is coming from here. If you look at this photo right here of the ornament and the block, I've turned off all of my lights but one, so I only have one light source. But I'm going to refer to this page, and I'll go ahead and put that little picture of our block and our ornament down in the corner. So I'll explain the highlight is where the light is coming from, the direction of the light where it's hitting the subject, and I go ahead and write HL. That's going to be short for our highlight. The next value that we're going to go to is the reflection, or the reflected light. We're going to skip that one for now and move right down to the half tone or the mid tone. I went ahead and did HT. That's going to be the part on your subject that is relatively neutral. It's usually the actual color, shade, or tone of the subject that you're drawing. It's called halftone or midtone because it's somewhere between the highlight and the shadow. So moving on is shadow. That's going to be our next darkest value. That is the opposite of the light on our subject. So if our light is coming from over here, if you look at our little picture with our block and our ornament, the shadow is almost the darkest part, and that would be the next value, and we did SH for shadow. And then last darkest would be the cast shadow, and that is basically the shadow of the subject onto the surface that it's being casted onto. And you can see that here, and you can see that in our little picture down in the bottom of the screen. I also mimicked this for you on a sphere, so the highlight, and you can see it on our ornament, the actual highlight from my actual light, and then the midtone would be the next, the shadow, and the sphere is actually a good example for me to show you the reflected light, the part that we skipped over. The reflected light is the light bouncing off of the surface and back onto the subject. And you see that more definitively on some reflective surface. Go ahead and put the handout to the side, all we're going to need is this section right here. And open your sketchbook to the next blank book page. And the book page is just going to be, this is after our drawings from last week. The book page is just going to be the next open page that is blank on both sides. And what I did here is I did my warm-up. Go ahead and pause the video and do a warm-up. We just did some lines, some circles, and some cubes, holding our pencil the right way. And then on the second half of this sheet, we're going to go ahead and make a couple of rectangles. So we're going to practice blending, hatching, cross hatching, and stippling. So that is 4 different techniques. So we are going to go, we're going to make a grid. And how many levels of value do we need to add, right? Highlight, reflection, halftone, shadow, and cast shadow. So we have 5. So we're going to go ahead and break this down into 5 pieces. I'm just going to go. Okie dokie. So this is going to be our blending. We're going to go B. This is going to be our hatching. This is going to be our cross hatching, CH, and this is going to be our stippling. We're going to go with an S. And this is going to be our highlight. This is going to be our reflected light. This is going to be our halftone or midtone. This is going to be our shadow, and this is going to be our cast shadow. So highlight is going to be the lightest part. So we're going to start with highlight. And I'm going to start with blending first of all, because this might be what you're most familiar with. And actually, let's start from the bottom. Let's start with the cast shadow, because we can start from pretty dark. So what we're going to do is we're going to mimic these squares here. We're going to start out dark and we're going to end up very light. So you're going to start out with the base of your cast shadow is going to be dark. And we're going to hold our pencil like this and kind of blend it around going up. So there we go. All right, next is hatching, and that's making a lot of one directional lines that fill up our space with medium, which is the pencil, until it is at the value that we want it to be. So cast shadow would be the darkest and the highlight would be our lightest. So sometimes the highlight wouldn't have any lines in it at all. So let's start with the cast shadow. So that's going to be the darkest. So we're basically, now you could do it, you could do the other way if you want to. I like to do it this way. So you're just filling that space up. And for hatching, you could either go small strokes or you can go long and fill up the whole space like that. Cross hatching is what it sounds like. It's hatching, but crossing. So you would go like this. So you could go all one way and then go back the other way and just keep doing that until you get enough of the medium in the space to give the value you desire. And then if we were going to do reflected light, we'd have a lot less than the cast shadow, so we might go And then last is the one that takes the most amount of time, and I admire you if you could dedicate yourself to it. It is really cool once you finish a piece. That is stippling. And that's where you do a bunch of repetitive multiple dots to fill up the space with pigment until you get your desired value. But you can see it here on the handout to see how I filled the space and then lighter. So we're going to demo how to use some of these methods by drawing our cube and our sphere. You could either copy this here or you could draw from the picture down there onto this side of the page. You could keep your handout around if you need to so that you could mimic it, or you could set it aside. You also have a guide here. So go ahead, take a second to sharpen your pencil because we'll need it sharp. Okay, so go ahead and on this page, let's split it in half. So on the top, we're going to do our cube, and on the bottom, we're going to do our sphere. So at the top here, we're going to do our cube, and we're going to put our cube in space by giving a horizon line somewhere in our space. And we're going to put our cube somewhere in this space. So it's going to fall, this would be our floor, and this would be the wall. So the cube is going to be on the floor. We're also going to do a sphere, so we practiced making circles earlier. So go ahead and make a circle as best you can. All right, so let's start by mapping out or sketching the shapes that make our highlights, halftones, and shadows. I like to start first with the highlights. Let's map that out. And as you can see in our picture with our block down on the corner down here, you can see that the highlight is this top part right here because our light is coming from here. So we're going to do that is our highlight. And you can see on the sphere, just like here, our highlight is here. We actually have a really bright light source along with a reflective surface. So our highlight is actually, you can really see the highlight. So this is our highlight. It's actually this, looks like a little donut that's on the sphere. Or over here, it would just be highlight. Okay, so next we're going to do we're going to skip the reflection. I like to do that last. We're going to do our halftone. So that's going to be this part of the block here. So that's our halftone. And then we're going to, and then our halftone on the globe would be right here. So halftone. And then our shadow would be, if our light's coming from here, our shadow's over here. So that's going to be our shadow, and then our shadow would be here, and then the highlight, you guys can see the paper is right here. That's the reflection. And then you can barely see it, but it's here, there, and then our cast shadow right there. And usually our cast shadow, depending on how hard or bright the light is that is shining against it, it's either has a hard edge or kind of a blurry edge. So, and this is our cast shadow. Cast shadow. All right, so how are you going to shade your highlights, reflections, halftones, and shadows? We could do blending, and with the blending you got to smudge with your finger, or you could use a Q-tip, but what I want to do is I want to color our masterpieces, and the easiest way to see the color through our markings is to use one of the ink method. So I'm going to go ahead and use hatching because I could show you the best way to do hatching. So doing hatching, I'm going to do my highlights, which I'm just going to leave them empty. I'm going to do my halftone. So let's see, I'm going to look at my sketch over here. How did my halftone look? Like that. And I'm going to do my lines as far across as I can. Now, if you wanted to do blending, you would just blend these together, or you'd shade in like that, but I'm just going to do, and then I'm going to do the same thing for my globe. Now, when you do the halftone, you could actually take the halftone all the way through to your shadow, because your shadow is just a darker version of your halftone. And if you notice, I'm making all my lines go in the same direction. Take the same tone over here. You could also take it over the cast shadow if you like, because the cast shadow is just the shadow, but darker. All right. And then the shadow is going to be darker than the halftone. Since I'm doing hatching, I just give it more lines until I fill the area. Or don't go over your reflected light because it's lighter than your shadow. And the cast shadow, you can go over it as well because it's going to be darker than your subject's shadow. And then go in and make your cast shadow even darker. And then you can go in and do your reflected, which is somewhere between here and there. All right, let's define our edges. And you could use your pointy end. I didn't really go into detail about the reflective surface, but I will in another lesson. And there we go. So you could just blend these together if you wanted to do blended. And let's say you want to make it brighter, just go ahead and pick some stuff up. Same applies to the highlight, the reflected light. If you went over there and did too much shading, you could always just erase. All right, so that would be our sphere and our block. And that is shading. So let's go ahead and apply our shading to our subjects from last lesson. Turn back to that page on your sketchbook. Let's get ready to apply what we have just learned. I hope these look familiar to y'all. These are our drawings from the last lesson after we practiced drawing the subjects, looking at them as an artist first and then making the basic shapes and then looking at it like a scientist and adding small details. I encouraged you to practice and do this over again if you could, if you didn't feel comfortable making something realistic. And if you have not redrawn it and you still don't feel comfortable with these, go ahead and take some time to go to an extra page, redraw them, or specifically redraw the one you want to make your masterpiece. We have 3 subjects, the Sharpie, the pencil sharpener, and the eraser. But for your masterpiece, you only have to complete one of them. So this is what I did. You don't have to do this yet. You're going to do this after we finish our shading lesson. So I'm going to show you what I did. So I went ahead and took my masterpiece paper and I started my masterpieces. So I redrew the pencil sharpeners for y'all, and I went through all the steps, and I have some time-lapse videos that show you how to get from lesson 1 to lesson 3, which is where we are here. You could either click a link to get to those videos, or you can jump ahead and fast forward to the end of this video and pick the one you want to see. So there's my pencil sharpener. There I did the Sharpie. All right, crew, now's the time to jump forward in the video to the subject you chose to do your masterpiece on. No need to do all of the subjects, just pick one, jump ahead, and get started. Let's go. Sharpeners. And like I said, you have one of these pencil sharpeners, I think, so I went ahead and did both for you. I'm gonna put a picture of our pencil sharpeners down in the bottom of the screen so you can see them down here, but you should be drawing from your actual pencil sharpener. And here we go. So we're gonna start out with the highlight, so the lightest tones on our subject. So we have the pencil sharpener, and here we go. So we're gonna start out with the highlight, so the lightest tones on our subject. So we have the pencil sharpener here, and part of being a good artist is having experience, and by experience I mean, you know, knowing how things work and what they look like. See, I could pick this up and I can look around and I can see how things work. So that's all just part of becoming a better artist, is having more experience. So let's find the highlight. So I see my pencil sharpener over here. I would call here, goes across, and then this part right here is lighter as well. It's like a really thin line up at the top. Now creating a shadow edge is where one value of a light source reaches the other. So I can make something look lighter by making something next to it look darker. So I'll bring the sketchbook page out. So I can make that, if this is a value, I can make that value look lighter by making this one darker. And that's creating an edge. So that's what I'm doing here with my pencil. So I'm going to establish, we have, because it looks like our light is coming from over here, our light's coming from here. We'd say our mid-tone is here, and we have a shadow in here. This is actually cast shadow. We have our shadow here, and all the way across here is shadow. This in here is halftone. This right here is shadow, and this is cast shadow, and then we have our cast shadow down here. Not a very big cast shadow. It looks like the light is pretty close to the subject. So we're going to go in and we're going to add our values. So let's start with the cast shadow. We're going to add the cast shadow, which goes right up against and we have a cast shadow in here. So I'm going to go in here, make that dark. Also a cast shadow on the opposite side where our blade is. So the blade is here, and then it creates a shadow on the inside where we can't see. So that's right here. Okay, and then we have our halftone. Remember, we have a highlight here, so our halftone, I'm going to go back here. Now our actual subject is black, so we're You just pretend we're printing this in black and white. So I see that I made a little bit of this too dark, so I'm going to get my eraser, and you're going to go in and you're going to pick up the pencil lead, and that's where you barely tap and touch it where you want to lighten it up. You're not erasing, you're just lightening. All right. So we can go back in here, get our halftone, and now we have to add our shadow. So our shadow is here, so we're going to go somewhere between our cast shadow and our halftone. I'm going to go ahead and give my subjects some space. Let's see, I kind of did them in different spaces, didn't I? And there we go, establish your edges. Not a lot of blending to do here because it's a pretty flat on each side subject. But if you're happy with that there, I would be happy with it too. Okay, so let's do this one. So let's go ahead and start out with laying out our shadows and highlights. So we have our highlights are, because we're working with another cube, it's going to be very similar to the other one. So our highlight is up here. Our reflective surface is a highlight. We have our mid-tone would be here. It's a little lighter because the wood is light. This is our shadow. We're going to do our cast shadow right here. And this one should be pretty easy. So it's got the cast shadow in here, and there's a reflection over here. Cast shadows first. Those are the darkest because it's easier to build up from dark for me than it is to go from light to dark. You might be different. That's our highlight, so I'm not going to do any of that. We have our mid-tone, our halftone, which would be right here. We have our shadow, which is here. Now this is a round object. So if you notice here on this pencil sharpener, it's a hard shadow up against a highlight. And it's an edge. This is a hard edge. But this pencil sharpener, it's rounded, so we won't have a hard edge. We'll have a soft edge. So if we give our shadow, we want our shadow to softly blend into the top part where the highlight is. And it also helps to do what's called contouring. And that's where your pencil marks follow the shape of like that. And so that tells everybody it's round. All right, so I'm gonna add some more lines. I think that shadow needs to be a little bit darker. Remember, I gotta blend it in. And then we need to do our reflected light. So we're just gonna pick up, see that? So this would be the halftone or the mid-tone right here. You can hardly see that, but it's there. And we have just some stuff going on here, like we got a little highlight right there. So there we did our pencil sharpener. This one is a reflective surface, so it's going to have some bright highlights, and it's going to have a black top, so we're going to do that shadow. So let's start by finding our highlights. We have a highlight that goes from here to here, and it's kind of got like a toothpick shape to it. We're going to simplify it, so we're just going to do that as the whole highlight. And then we have another highlight up here, but that one doesn't go all the way across. It just goes to there. And we have a little highlight up here. And then we have a highlight in here. And you see how this reflective surface has a lot of highlights? All right, and then we have we're going to skip our midtones and go straight to our shadows. So of course we have a shadow on the bottom. We have a cast shadow, which because our Sharpie is round and it picks up, this is the bottom of the Sharpie, so the shadow would go on the ground. And mimic the shape of the Sharpie. All right, so there's a shadow. We also, in here, we have some shadow. So obviously the light's coming from here and this sticks out, and this is going to cast a shadow. And this is a shadow right here. And these are shadows down here. All right, so let's get started by putting those in. So we're gonna start with our cast shadow, because besides our pen cap, our shadow is the darkest part. Also, of course, if your subject is white, just leave it white. We're going to define this edge on the bottom because our shadow will get really dark underneath. So go ahead and define that edge just by darkening the line just under the subject. All right, we're also going to add our tone to our Sharpie top. So just go ahead and, other than on the highlights, lay down a tone. That's going to cover the entire pen cap. Just not over the highlights. Leave the highlights white. Okay, so then go in and we got to make the shadows darker than the midtones. We already mapped out where this shadow is going to go. There's a highlight here, so I'm going to go pick that out with my eraser. We also have a bit of a shadow here. Again, we have a reflective surface, so it's a lot more complicated. So we're going to go a little darker here. And you notice I'm following with my shadows the shape of the pen cap. Like we're going around. I'll clean up those lines later. And then we have shadow in here. There's another reflection in there, but I can't get to it. All right, so let's lay down the tone for this side of our Sharpie. So this side of our Sharpie is a lot lighter than that side, but don't forget we have our reflection. Do not color in the reflection, but other than that, go ahead and lay down the halftone for the gray color. Now remember, if you're blending, you could just shade it in. That's up to you. I like to do hatching because then when I color over it, you can see my color. This is a shadow down here, so remember when you're putting your halftone down, you can go right over it. All right, so let's go in and put down our shadow. So we're just gonna go a little bit darker. And then this is a shadow that mimics this shape. And then this is darker. All right, define your edges. I gotta give my pencil a sharpen. Define our edges with a sharp edge. You can also come in with your black color pencil if you are satisfied with your lines. All right, I'm gonna come in with my eraser and erase my highlights a little bit better. Let's see if this one works better. Yeah, so some mediums you can go in and put your highlights in after. And there's the Sharpie. All right, eraser. So let's go ahead and start. Let's put down that cast shadow. I just realized I gotta fix this. Just centering my subject, that's what that line does. Okay, so my cast shadow, light's coming from here. Cast shadow is the shape of the eraser on the ground. And I'm using a hard light, so it's a hard edge shadow. And we have our regular shadow, which is over here. And it's a soft shadow over here. So just remember that this doesn't have an edge, this does. And our mid-tone is here. We have a rounded subject, so our highlights and shadows will probably have curves. And my highlights are here, here, and a little bit here, so I have like a cast shadow there. All right, let's go ahead and start adding these in. Cast shadow will be the darkest, the closest it is to the subject, and start to get lighter as it fades away. So you can make it a little bit lighter back here. And we have our subject's shadow, so there is also a little bit of a darker area right here. And then we have our shadow, which is right here. We have our highlight, which we are going to leave alone, because if we were coloring this, we would put the color in right there. This is our halftone. So remember, this is a rounded shape, so we are fading our shadows and highlights into each other. And I want to make my lines go the same direction. All right, let's go ahead and go in and darken our cast shadow. And clean up our edges. And there we go. We should have a few masterpieces. Go ahead and sign off on your masterpiece. Don't forget to date it. We're not going to have time to add color, but feel free to draw this one more time and add some color. Remember, you only have to pick one of the three subjects, whether you want to do the sharpener, you want to do the Sharpie, or you want to do the eraser. All right, crew, so if you didn't start your masterpiece today, that's okay. Go ahead and start it in your own time. There's no pressure to grasp everything that I've taught you within the last 4 weeks right away. So don't forget to do a first draft, second draft, third draft, or however many drafts you need to do, and practice, repeat until you get to your masterpiece. I look forward to seeing you next week. Goodbye.